When we talk about positivity, most people assume it's inherently helpful. After all, who wouldn't want to feel better, think better, and move through life with a sense of optimism? But there's a version of positivity that doesn't actually support growth or healing. In fact, it does the opposite. It shuts it down. This is what we call toxic positivity, and it often shows up in ways that sound supportive on the surface, but are deeply dismissive underneath. Phrases like "just stay positive," "it could be worse," or "everything happens for a reason," are usually offered with good intentions. But intention doesn't erase impact. When someone is in pain, these responses don't create connection. They create distance. One of the most important insights from Brené Brown is that human beings are wired for connection, and connection requires emotional honesty. When we rush to replace someone's pain with positivity, what we're really doing is communicating, "Your feelings are too much," or "I'm uncomfortable sitting with this." And over time, that message teaches people to silence themselves. Think about what happens psychologically in that moment. When someone experiences pain, whether it's grief, failure, betrayal, or uncertainty, their nervous system is already trying to process something overwhelming. If, on top of that, they receive the message that their pain is invalid or excessive, they don't just feel hurt, they feel alone in their hurt. And loneliness intensifies suffering. This is why toxic positivity is not neutral. It doesn't simply fail to help, it actively undermines the emotional process that leads to healing. Because healing requires acknowledgement, it requires language, it requires space. Real hope begins in a very different place. It begins with the willingness to tell the truth, not a polished version of the truth, not a version that makes other people comfortable, but the kind of truth that says, "This is hard, I'm struggling, I don't have it all figured out." That kind of honesty is not weakness. It's actually a form of psychological strength, because it takes courage to stay present with discomfort rather than escaping it. It takes awareness to recognize that pain is not a problem to be solved immediately, but an experience to be understood. And this is where a deeper philosophical layer comes in. If you look at human development, whether through psychology, philosophy, or even neuroscience, growth does not come from avoidance. It comes from integration. We grow by integrating our experiences, including the painful ones, into a coherent sense of self. But integration can't happen if we deny the experience in the first place. So when we replace pain with forced positivity, we interrupt that process. We create a kind of emotional fragmentation, where parts of ourselves are acceptable and other parts have to be hidden. And over time, that fragmentation leads to disconnection, not just from others, but from ourselves. Real hope does something very different. It doesn't rush in to fix or minimize. It stays, it listens. It allows the full emotional reality to exist without trying to edit it. This doesn't mean we stay stuck in negativity. That's a common misunderstanding. Honoring pain is not the same as dwelling in it. It's about creating enough space for the emotion to move through us, rather than getting trapped beneath it. Because emotions, when acknowledged, tend to evolve, grief softens, fear becomes clarity, confusion becomes insight. But that transformation only happens when we allow the process to unfold naturally. And this is why empathy is so powerful. Not empathy as a technique, but empathy as a presence. When someone says, "That sounds really hard," or "I'm here with you," they're not fixing the pain, but they're removing the isolation around it. And that changes everything. In many ways, real hope is built in those moments, not through grand declarations or motivational slogans, but through quiet, honest acknowledgement. It's built when we stop pretending and start connecting, when we allow ourselves and others to be fully human, messy, uncertain, and still worthy of understanding. There's also a responsibility here, not just in how we respond to others, but in how we respond to ourselves. Because toxic positivity isn't only external, it can become internal. we start policing our own emotions. We tell ourselves to snap out of it, to be grateful, to move on, before we've actually processed what we're feeling. And the cost of that is self-alienation. We lose access to our own emotional truth. Real hope invites us back into that relationship. It says, you don't have to rush this. You don't have to pretend. You're allowed to feel what you feel and still believe that something meaningful can come from it. That's the balance, not positivity instead of pain, but hope alongside it. Because the truth is, pain is not the opposite of hope. Avoidance is, and when we stop avoiding, when we choose to face our experience with honesty and compassion, we don't become weaker, we become more whole. So instead of asking, how do I stay positive through this? A more powerful question might be, how do I stay present through this? Because presence is what makes healing possible. And healing is what makes hope real. In the end, people don't need you to brighten their pain, they need you to respect it. If we move one step deeper, we begin to see that hope is often misunderstood in a very fundamental way. Many people think of hope as a feeling, something that arrives when circumstances improve, when certainty increases, or when life starts to make sense again. But that version of hope is fragile, because it depends entirely on things we can't control. What Brené Brown makes clear is that real hope is not passive, and it's not comfortable. It's an active, disciplined way of engaging with reality. It requires participation, and more importantly, it requires courage. Because the moment you choose hope, you are also choosing uncertainty. This is where toxic positivity and real hope diverge in a very significant way. Toxic positivity tries to eliminate uncertainty by replacing it with certainty that isn't actually there. It says everything will be fine, whether or not that's true. It offers reassurance without evidence. And while that might feel soothing in the short term, it doesn't build resilience, it weakens it. Because when reality doesn't match the promise, what's left is disappointment, confusion, and often self-doubt. Real hope doesn't make those promises. It doesn't guarantee outcomes. Instead, it asks a much harder question. Can you stay open to possibility without needing control? Psychologically, that's a demanding task. The human brain is wired to seek predictability. We want to know what's going to happen, how things will turn out, and whether we're safe. Uncertainty triggers discomfort because it removes that sense of control, and so the instinct is to escape it, to replace it with certainty, even if that certainty is artificial. But growth doesn't happen in certainty. It happens in the space where outcomes are unknown. This is why courage becomes central to hope. Not courage as fearlessness, but courage as the willingness to move forward despite fear, to remain engaged despite not having guarantees, to continue investing emotionally in a future that hasn't yet proven itself. And that kind of courage is not loud or dramatic. It's often quiet. It shows up in small, consistent decisions, choosing to try again after failure, choosing to trust again after betrayal, choosing to believe in your own capacity when evidence feels limited. These choices are not easy. In fact, they often go against our immediate emotional instincts. When we're hurt, the instinct is to withdraw. When we're uncertain, the instinct is to control. When we're afraid, the instinct is to protect ourselves by shutting down. Hope asks us to do something different. It asks us to stay engaged. There's also a deeper philosophical layer to this. If you think about what it means to live a meaningful life, it's not a life free from difficulty. It's a life in which we are fully present to our experience, including the parts that are uncomfortable. Meaning is not found in avoiding struggle. It's found in how we relate to it. Real hope is a relational stance toward the future. It doesn't deny the present, but it refuses to let the present define everything that's possible. It holds space for both reality and potential at the same time. And that dual awareness is what makes it powerful. It allows you to say, This is difficult, and I don't know how it will turn out, but I'm still willing to show up for it. That willingness is where resilience is built, not in moments of certainty, but in moments of ambiguity, not when things are easy, but when they're unclear and you choose to continue anyway. It's also important to understand that hope is not just an internal process. It's shaped by our environment. The people around us, the conversations we engage in, the narratives we absorb, all of these influence whether hope feels accessible or not. When we are surrounded by messages that demand constant positivity, we learn to hide our struggles. But when we are in environments that allow honesty, complexity, and vulnerability, hope becomes more sustainable. Because it's not built on illusion, it's built on truth. This is why vulnerability is not separate from hope. It's a prerequisite for it. Without vulnerability, hope becomes performative. It becomes something we say rather than something we practice. But when we allow ourselves to be vulnerable, to admit fear, doubt, and uncertainty, we create the conditions for real hope to emerge. And that kind of hope is far more durable. It doesn't collapse when things go wrong because it was never based on things going right. It's based on the belief that we can navigate whatever comes, even if we don't yet know how. There's a quiet strength in that belief. It's not about confidence in outcomes, it's about confidence in process, in your ability to adapt, to learn, to endure, and to grow. So instead of asking, will everything work out? Real hope shifts the focus to a different question. Can I keep showing up even if it doesn't? That question changes everything. Because it places the power back where it belongs, not in external circumstances, but in internal capacity. And when you begin to live from that place, something shifts. You become less dependent on certainty and more anchored in resilience, less focused on controlling outcomes and more focused on engaging with the process. That's what makes hope real. Not that it promises a specific future, but that it empowers you to face whatever future arrives. In the end, hope is not about feeling better. It's about becoming braver.